The following podcast is brought to you by the Station of the Cross. Thank you for listening.
Change our home life. Change the way we educate our children.
It is the presence of God. He promised to leave. I will not leave you orphans.
Dear brothers and sisters, the Holy Spirit is with you.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host on the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network, where we proclaim the truth with clarity and charity. Let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment, that we might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Today is the first day of confirmation hearings for Judge Brett Kavanaugh, who's been nominated by President Trump to succeed Anthony Kennedy as a justice on the Supreme Court. That's always very important for us as a nation. Judge Kavanaugh is also a prominent Catholic, graduate of a Jesuit high school, and so it's prominent for us as the Church in America as Catholics. We want to know, is it important, the Supreme Court nomination, and why? And is it relevant that he's Catholic? Our guest today is George Ahrend, an attorney of many years' experience. He's on the board of directors of the Catholic Bar Association, and he's co-chair of the Catholic Bar Association's Advocacy Committee. George Ahrend, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Thank you very much.
George, can you give us a bit of a summary of what happened today, and then maybe a little bit of a background on Judge Kavanaugh?
Sure. The hearings just got over as we were coming on the air. The first, it can be broken down probably into three stages. The first 90 minutes almost was a back-and-forth exchange and a little bit of theater interrupted by protesters. The theater was this posturing about documents that either had or had not been produced in preparation for the hearings. The committee, both the Democrat and Republican sides of the committee, have their own staffs, they have their own budgets, they have their own ability to request documents that are available from Judge Kavanaugh's work in the Bush administration, from his work in the independent counsel investigation headed by Kenneth Starr regarding the Clintons and Whitewater and the Monica Lewinsky episode, as well as his time as a judge. And so there was seemed to be basic lack of agreement over how many documents there were, how many had been requested, how many had been produced, and there was a series of motions by some of the Democrat members of the committee to try and adjourn or postpone the hearings until those documents could be obtained and reviewed. I think the purpose of that was to try and delay, as many of the members of the committee and other senators have urged up to this point, that the confirmation hearings be delayed until after the election, perhaps thinking that the balance of power in the Senate might change. In any event, the chairman of the committee, Charles Grassley, kind of rebuffed all those attempts to adjourn or postpone the hearing and moved ahead, and there proceeded, every member of the committee made a lengthy statement, or I guess they were of varying lengths, but on the Democrat side of the aisle, it seemed to be a pretty uniform narrative that Judge Kavanaugh seemed to be a nice person, but that they had some questions about his candor during his earlier confirmation hearings to be on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Those were raised by Senator Durbin, and those were relating to Judge Kavanaugh's involvement or lack of involvement in legal authorization for the use of enhanced interrogation techniques or torture. And then the rest of it was questioning whether Judge Kavanaugh, if elected or appointed to the Supreme Court, if that was confirmed, how he would rule on everything from abortion to gun rights to religious freedom and presidential power. I think because of work demands, I couldn't listen to the entire hearing, but I listened to most of it today, and it seemed like the most consistent theme was that Judge Kavanaugh was being picked by President Trump because he had written a law review article in 2009 after his experience in the Ken Starr independent investigation, and that law review article advocated that presidents should be immune during their presidency, so the prosecution or civil suits should be deferred until after they left office. And they wondered if that would affect how Brett Kavanaugh would rule should something come up to the Supreme Court involving the independent counsel investigation of Trump. On the Republican side, it was, I think there was, aside from saying a lot of nice things about Judge Kavanaugh personally, there seemed to be two themes that emerged, and that was that Congress, and I was surprised to hear some of this, that Congress has abdicated its responsibilities to pass laws by delegating them to administrative agencies.
I was very surprised to hear that, too. I think it was first voiced by the senator from Nebraska, whose name escapes me at the moment, but I was very surprised to hear that admission.
Yeah, Ben Sasse, and he
Yes.
articulated it extremely well, and then it was seconded by, I think it was hinted at by some of the prior senators, and then seconded by senators on the Republican side who spoke after him, kind of making the point that one of the reasons judicial nomination fights are now so political, at least since the late 1980s, is that we are trying to turn judges into politicians and having them decide political issues.
Right. Right. Now, you described the proceedings as theater. I mean, do you mean to say that this was not the expression of sincere, deeply held convictions by these elected officials?
So I think that makes it sound so pejorative. And so let me answer it this way. Every member of this committee has already announced their position on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, and every member on the Republican side supports the nomination, and every member on the Democrat side is against the nomination. I heard one comment that I haven't had a chance to check, but that the Democrat members had announced their opposition within 24 hours of Judge Kavanaugh being named. Now, of course, he was previously on a list, something really unprecedented, the list that Donald Trump put out listing the folks that he would choose from for Supreme Court nominees. The Republicans thought that gave this nomination some super legitimacy as compared to prior nominations other than maybe Gorsuch, because that slate of judicial nominees had been put before the voters as an important part of the campaign.
Is it my impression, and again, this is the irony. On the one hand, everybody knows in advance how everyone is going to vote, and yet there seemed to be some lamentation that there was some mysterious memorandum hidden at the bottom of a pile of hundreds of thousands that would somehow produce a smoking gun and then would reveal that Brett Kavanaugh is a horrible person or unfit for office and so on. Could you give us a quick summary of Judge Kavanaugh's background and accomplishments?
Sure. He is a lifelong resident of the Washington, D.C. area, I think Maryland, but I don't hold me to that. He attended Catholic schools all the way through high school, and in fact, he attended the same high school that Justice Gorsuch had attended. I think he was 2 years senior to Justice Gorsuch.
Right.
After that, he went to Yale University and Yale Law School, where he was had an exceptional record, was what we notes editor of the Law Review, so that's the publication. I don't know if listeners would be aware of it, but most law schools have one or more journals that are authored by students, and it's an important kind of forum for scholarly development of the law, and so he had a position on the Yale Law Review. It's a fairly selective group.
Right.
After law school. He had an internship, I think, in the Solicitor General's office, which is the Solicitor General is the office of the executive branch that essentially represents the president and the administration before the Supreme Court. And then he had a series of clerkships, one in the Third Circuit and one in the Ninth Circuit, and then eventually with Justice Kennedy. And I think, again, his time with Justice Kennedy actually overlapped with Justice Gorsuch's time as a clerk for Justice Kennedy. Mm-hmm. And then he was after that, he went to work for Ken Starr when he was the independent counsel investigating Whitewater and the Lewinsky affair.
Right.
From there, he went to the Bush administration and worked as, I think it was, the title has secretary in it, but it's kind of more of a clearinghouse for policy and positions that the administration would take. He worked for the administration for a while and then went into private practice before President Bush appointed him to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, where he's been since 2006.
So it sounds like his resume couldn't fit in a small envelope with one stamp. I mean, in other words, he's made with a very long paper trail and a record of really distinguished and accomplished service. And one would think that the way if you listened to the hearings and took them at face value, that somehow he was going to be revealed to be an incompetent if only they found the right piece of paper to show that he was incompetent. So it makes one wonder, what is the root of the opposition to Judge Kavanaugh? When we come back, we're going to ask that question. Is it a result of anti-Catholic bigotry that there is so much opposition to Judge Kavanaugh? And we want you to call in now at 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Tune in weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern for Sermons for Everyday Living. There's no better way to start your day than with spiritual formation from inspiring priests as they preach the gospel in the midst of your busy life. For details about upcoming episodes and for podcasts of past shows, visit thestationofthecross.com and click on Sermons for Everyday Living under the Programs tab. That's Sermons for Everyday Living, weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
Do you enjoy praying with others through Catholic Radio? If Catholic Radio is a benefit to you and your loved ones, help us continue the good work of the Lord by donating today at thestationofthecross.com.
Our family has spanned the centuries and the globe. With God's grace, we started hospitals to care for the sick. We established orphanages and helped the poor. We are the largest charitable organization on the planet, bringing comfort to those in need. We educate more children than any other institution. We developed the scientific method and founded the college system. We defend the dignity of human life and uphold marriage. Guided by the Holy Spirit, we compiled the Bible. We are transformed by sacred scripture and sacred tradition, which have guided us for 2,000 years. We are the Catholic Church. With over 1 billion in our family, sharing in the sacraments and fullness of the Christian faith. Jesus started our church when he said to Peter, the first pope, "You are rock, and upon this rock I will build my church." So if you've been away from the Catholic Church, we invite you to take another look. Visit CatholicsComeHome.org today. We are Catholic. Welcome home.
Did you know you can listen to our great Catholic programming even when you're not in range of our station? Visit thestationofthecross.com, then click the Listen Live button on our homepage.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call into the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Each morning, the Catholic Current sends out a short survey on the topic for today's show so that you can share your thoughts and any questions you might have. This is a great way to participate, especially if you aren't able to call in live. A few of the responses will be read over the air to add to the discussion, so make sure you sign up to receive our emailed survey at thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host at the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network, where we proclaim the truth with clarity and charity. Our topic today has to do with the first day of confirmation hearings of Judge Kavanaugh, President Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court. Our guest is George Ahrend, a lawyer of much experience and on the board of directors of the Catholic Bar Association. In the first segment, we had a summary of what took place in the first day of hearings, which was a whole lot of speechifying and some rambunctious behavior from the audience. And then we looked briefly at the record of accomplishment of Judge Kavanaugh. In this segment, we're going to ask, why is there so much opposition to a man of such erudition and accomplishment, and by everyone's account, a man of good character? Is there anti-Catholic bigotry at work? We want you to weigh in on that question. Call us now at 1-877-511-5483 or text us at the same number, 1-877-511-5483. George, help us to understand what's going on here. If you listen to the speeches today, and to atone for my many sins, I listened to all of them, you would think that he was one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse coming to invade the Supreme Court. What's driving this animus towards Brett Kavanaugh?
So there's the tactics and then the strategy that I would distinguish from. There was no, that I saw, overt anti-Catholicism. There's, of course, people on the committee like Senator Feinstein from California, who is somewhat famous for noting that Judge Amy Coney Barrett, when she was up for nomination, she said, as a criticism, that the dogma lives loudly in her, which maybe reveals a little bit of potential bias. But I think the strategy is the real concern, and you heard this in probably most of the Democratic senators' comments, and they phrase it in terms of women's health care, but what they're really talking about is preserving a maximal right to abortion. It wasn't mentioned, but I think because of Kennedy's importance as a swing vote, that kind of a subtext is concern about the fate of same-sex marriage. And so they argue those to some extent as reasons why they're not supporting Judge Kavanaugh, and I think that's the kind of the primary issues. There's some other issues that are thrown in there too, like guns, although I think in the one decision that we have from Judge Kavanaugh about regulation of firearms, that he was at least personally expressed some skepticism about a maximal view of the Second Amendment. But I think the tactics here are really just to delay the nomination until the election, or in getting these documents that they've requested, to try and find something, some indefensible needle in the haystack of documents, and that would give them ammunition to help stop the nomination. And failing that, you will see this probably more tomorrow, the second day of hearings, when Judge Kavanaugh is going to be answering questions for probably the whole day, and that they'll be trying to get him to make commitments about his willingness to uphold Roe, or to chip away, or not to chip away at the edges of Roe. But I would say that rather than anti-Catholic, I would characterize it more as a pro-abortion kind of agenda that seems to be the primary motivation. The other issues seem to be more part of the tactics to restrict or to stop the nomination, like all the stuff about presidential power. I thought it was interesting. One of the senators quoted Senator Biden, a Democratic senator from Delaware, who had relied on the article that Judge Kavanaugh wrote about not subjecting presidents to criminal or civil prosecution while they're in office. And that kind of depends on whose ox is being gored. And they've made some points about the recent convictions and guilty plea involving Trump associates, but I don't really think that was the focus of it. I think it was abortion and same-sex marriage, if I had to kind of read between the lines.
And what's interesting, too, as we mentioned that, is I know of at least two members of the committee who identify as Catholics, Dianne Feinstein and Patrick Leahy, and they see what they call a woman's right to choose. They never say the A word out loud. They don't actually say abortion. They talk about women's health and women's right to choose. And every now and again, you'll hear whispers about back alleys and so on, which is a myth that our regular listeners know. You know, we've debunked on a number of our shows, including Love Will End Abortion. But what are the prospects of are the Democrats playing Chicken Little? Oh my goodness, here's a Catholic. Abortion's going to be gone the day after Judge Kavanaugh is sworn in on the Supreme Court. Is that a likely scenario? Or is this just playing to the gallery for fundraising and to make it interesting theater for the base?
It can serve both purposes. It certainly is an effective way for them, on the Democratic side, on the pro-abortion side, to mobilize the base. I think it demonstrates how insecure a footing Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey have, kind of theoretically, legally, philosophically, and I think that's why they have real concern about the vitality of those precedents. It isn't just that it's good to motivate the base. Of course, it also motivates the base on the other side of the aisle as well. But I think it's a reflection that when we have judges stick their neck out to rule on an issue that has very little, if any, very tenuous grounding in the text and history of the Constitution, that is the right to an abortion, that they feel insecure about the status of that precedent.
Well, when I taught medical ethics to undergraduates, and they most certainly never read Roe versus Wade and, the Supreme Court decision, much less did they ever listen to or read the oral arguments, they think at first that I'm making it up because it's so badly argued. And when they come to the phrase, emanations from the penumbra, they say, oh, come on, Father, no adult really wrote that. So, I think intuitively they have a sense that from a logical point of view, they're on really thin ice. What about the concern for gay marriage? I know that Senator Cory Booker has said we need to preserve the right of people to love whom they love. I know it's hard to make predictions, but do you think it's likely that a case will come before the Supreme Court in the coming year that could put gay marriage at risk or under review?
It's hard to imagine that it would, partly because it's so recent, but there are similar concerns about the conceptual footing. Even the advocates for same-sex marriage have consistently said that homosexuality, same-sex attraction, or sexual orientation, however you want to describe it, should be a protected class like other protected classifications from race, ethnicity, religion, whatever, because and the normal way we figure that out is, are they a discrete and insular minority that has suffered a history of persecution and discrimination? And if they are, then they're entitled to any disability or discrimination is entitled to a heightened level of scrutiny by judges, meaning it's difficult for laws to be passed that would put them at a disability. That's not what the Justice Kennedy did in the Obergefell decision when the Supreme Court recognized same-sex marriage. There's a very novel, very kind of unformed hybridization of due process and equal protection that I won't pretend to understand the concept there, other than it's kind of like in the abortion decision that he wrote in the Planned Parenthood versus Casey, that at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence. Well, maybe that allows you to define marriage for yourself as well. Now, again, that's him philosophizing. That's not constitutional text.
Right.
So, even though I don't see a case coming immediately, it seems subject to attack.
Right. It's on very thin ice. And again, when we Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and basically Judge Kennedy has said, we get to determine, life, the universe, and everything. And someone said this is something that you'd expect from, a better grade of fortune cookie, and it's passed as jurisprudence. And that kind of view. There's nothing that it can't include or that it can't be open to. It's the ultimate legal wild card. And friends, we want to hear from you right now at 1-877-511-5483. If you watch the hearings today, what do you think? George, we had a text from an anonymous listener, and I don't know if the person understood what was said correctly. They said that Judge Kavanaugh thinks that the president should be able to change laws, and should we be worried about that? I don't think that's quite what Judge Kavanaugh has said, is it, that the president should change laws?
No. It was when he worked in the Bush administration. He is reputed to have participated in the drafting of some signing statements. Those are statements that the Office of the President issues when it signs a bill that's been adopted by Congress that adds kind of explanatory information and suggests in those, and I think there's in one speech he had suggested that the President has no obligation to enforce an unconstitutional law. Now that should be subject to judicial review. The president doesn't have unilateral authority to just declare laws unconstitutional, and Judge Kavanaugh, I don't think, would ever say that. But he would say that just like we all have an obligation, anybody who participates in government has an obligation to follow the Constitution. That means you don't do things that are unconstitutional, even if another coordinate branch tells you to do it.
Well, there was, I forget which American wit had said, there are two things you never want to see being made, sausage and legislation. I think the third might be Supreme Court confirmation hearings. When we come back, we're going to raise the question of, should it make any difference at all whether or not a Supreme Court nominee is Catholic? We want you to be part of the conversation. Get on the line now, 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rick Fitzgibbons from the Institute for Marital Healing. Are you looking for ways to strengthen your marital friendship and love? Your marriage can be transformed by learning how to overcome the stress of selfishness, excessive anger, and controlling behaviors. Problems like anxiety and loneliness and other weaknesses can also be overcome through positive communication and self-giving. Visit maritalhealing.com for free, effective advice on identifying these issues and on improving your marriage. That's maritalhealing.com.
This Divine Mercy Reflection is from the Diary of St. Maria Faustina. Do you remember the first time you told your parents, "I can do this myself," only to find out that you could not? We can do this very thing in our spiritual lives. In paragraph 1087 in the diary, St. Faustina writes, "When one day I resolved to practice a certain virtue, I lapsed into the vice opposed to that virtue 10 times more frequently than on other days. In the evening, I was reflecting on why today I had lapsed so extraordinarily, and I heard the words, 'You were counting too much on yourself and too little on me.' And I understood the cause of the lapses." This Divine Mercy Reflection is brought to you by the Station of the Cross.
The Liturgy of the Hours is prayed 3 times a day on the Station of the Cross at 5 a.m., 3 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern. The Liturgy of the Hours is a meditative and efficacious way to foster habitual prayer. It is the daily prayer of the Church, prayed throughout the world by priests, religious, and laity. For details about each hour and for more information about the Liturgy of the Hours, visit thestationofthecross.com. You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call in to the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. If you miss any portion of today's show or want to listen to any past episodes, click the podcast link under the Programs tab at the top of our homepage, thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host to the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network, where we proclaim the truth with clarity and charity. Our topic today is a review of the first day of hearings for the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh as next member of the Supreme Court, and our guest is George Ahrend, who is on the Board of Directors for the Catholic Bar Association. In the last segment, we were considering why there is so much opposition to Judge Kavanaugh and wondering if there was anti-Catholic bigotry at work, and George had suggested that perhaps what's going on is really a concern that somehow Judge Kavanaugh might be part of a Supreme Court movement to undercut so-called abortion rights and rights to gay marriage. In this segment, we're going to be asking, should it make any difference at all, the religious affiliation of a nominee for a Supreme Court? George, you know that every morning we send out surveys to our listeners, and we read some of the responses on the air. I want to read to you a response from Brian. Brian writes, "In our pluralistic society, it does not matter whether Supreme Court Justice is Catholic. However, I'm glad he is." And he goes on to say, "I also hope he draws from the teachings of the Church to influence his decisions." George, let's take that last sentence. I hope he draws from the teachings of the Church to influence his decisions. As I read that on the air, do you think an alarm went off in Dianne Feinstein's office?
Well, maybe. I think what Brian said is correct, that it isn't, obviously there's no religious test under the U.S. Constitution for public office, and that means no excluding Catholics, but it also means being Catholic is not a job requirement. But some of the basic values that we as Catholics hold that, come from church teaching, but also derived from natural law and are probably accessible to non-Catholics equally, or if not equally, they are also accessible to non-Catholics, and that's especially important at the Supreme Court. The vast majority of judges at what we call the trial court level, they're just in charge of marshaling evidence and determining what the facts are in a particular case, and a court of appeals level is, and this is true in federal and state systems across the country, Court of Appeals is responsible for making sure that the law is correctly applied to those facts. But when you get to the Supreme Court, you're really at the edges of there could be ambiguity as to what the law is and what the law should be, or and so that's where there's a room at the edges of statutory enactments or constitutional provisions, or in novel circumstances that are applied to those under those statutory or constitutional provisions. That's where the value choices or values of the judges really make a difference. And so we as Catholics would want to see somebody who's committed to the dignity of persons and the common good, and the principle of subsidiarity and solidarity with those who are poor and powerless and unpopular. And those values are probably essential for what I would consider to be a good judge. And when you have a judge like, Kennedy is probably departing from when he was writing what we call the sweet mystery of life. I think Justice Scalia gets the credit for phrasing it as that, the sweet mystery of life passage in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. He's bringing his own value choices to bear on his decision making that aren't in accordance with Catholic teaching, but he was a Catholic. And so I guess more than being a Catholic is commitment to these principles, that it isn't, it's helpful to be Catholic maybe because you have greater exposure to these principles that underlie Catholic social teaching and thought, but certainly aren't unique to Catholics, and not all Catholics possess them.
Well, I want to dwell on two features. One is, Catholic moral teaching is often presented as a quirk that should be kept private. If you want to put ashes on your forehead, one day out of the year, you go right ahead. If you want to avoid eating meat on Fridays, you go right ahead. If you want to wear a dozen scapulars under your shirt, you go right ahead. Just keep it to yourself. And oftentimes the faith is presented that way. But there is a very long tradition of moral reflection within the Church that anyone with ordinary common sense and good reason could understand and have access to. Love your children, provide for their education. Don't take what doesn't belong to you. Don't initiate force. And that's just common sense. And then when we get to special revelation, things that only faithful Catholics are obliged to believe, I think that reinforces the common sense. The human person is sacred because the human person is made in the image and likeness of God. And while a person of ordinary common sense could understand, don't murder the child in your womb, it's someone of faith who would be inclined to read Psalm 139 and say, behold, you knit me in my mother's womb. The shadow side of that is that what is obviously available to everyone of common sense and good reason, and that's what the natural law is, and what is obviously available and obligatory for people who identify as Catholics is not always embraced and endorsed as Catholic. It's interesting. I haven't looked at the numbers in recent years, and maybe you can help me out with this, George. But I think that the religious commitment that is most largely represented in Congress is Catholic. And that if you're Catholic and you're a member of Congress or Senate, you're almost certainly also a supporter of so-called abortion rights. That was the case in a couple of years ago. How about now? Do you have any data on that?
I can't give you specifics, but that fits with my understanding as well.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, and that just surprises me. And as a priest, people look at me and say, "Well, why doesn't someone do something about that?" And I said, "Well, it's not anything that I can do directly. I'm not the bishop of Senator Feinstein. I'm not the bishop of Senator Leahy, but I can help form Catholic consciences as well. And we want to hear from the consciences of our listeners. I'm sure that you have something to say. Call us now at 1-877-511-5483. Or text us now at 1-877-511-5483. George, do you know if Judge Kavanaugh has issued any rulings on capital punishment?
I don't believe, not that I'm familiar with. I do know that he gave a speech to the American Enterprise Institute where he was complimenting a dissent written by Justice Rehnquist in the mid-'70s. It's Georgia versus, I want to say Furman, or Furman versus Georgia. I don't remember who comes first, where the U.S. Supreme Court sort of temporarily outlawed capital punishment, and that was then later reversed. And he was complimentary of that opinion. I'm not familiar whether he's spoken out otherwise on capital punishment.
Well, perhaps at another time we can have you on again, or some of your colleagues, and talk about capital punishment, which has been a topic of conversation recently in the Catholic world. There's also been a concern among our listeners that given the sweet mystery of life statement from Judge Kennedy in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, that absolutely everything is up for grabs. That we might even have marriage redefined yet again, and have group marriage or polygamy. Do you think that's around the corner for us, to refight marriage again, to expand it further, or do you think that we still need to wait for the dust to settle at this point?
Probably still in the dust settling phase. I'm not aware of any current efforts. There were some efforts made in Utah that to challenge marriage laws in that state based on the prohibition against polygamy, and I haven't heard or seen that they've gone anywhere. It would it's hard to imagine it. But by the same token, if we were to go back 10 or 15 years, it would be hard to imagine that we've ended up where we are now. So I worry about it, but I'm not aware of any threats currently.
Well, it's funny, the things that we couldn't have imagined 10 or 15 years ago. I said once in a homily, I said, I'm from a mixed marriage. My mother was a woman and my father was a man, and people laugh. And I say, but 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that would have been unintelligible. No one would have understood that, and my concern as a Catholic priest is that those who are in the professions, those who are in areas of social and civil influence, have lost the vocabulary to have serious moral reflection about these very important issues. When we come back, we're going to ask, what should faithful Catholics rightly expect of the Supreme Court? We want you to be part of the conversation. Be ready to call us at 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Tune in weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern for Sermons for Everyday Living, a program that brings you real sermons from real priests on topics important to you and your faith. Visit thestationofthecross.com for details.
Invest your talents. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. Jesus wants us to be like the servants who use their talents to make more talents. Invest your talents as a Station of the Cross business sponsor and underwriter. Listeners will learn about your business, and you'll be helping Catholic Radio. Want bonus spots? Sign up now with our special offer for the first 26 businesses. Plus, take advantage of maximum flexibility, discounted rates, and value packages. Use your talents to create awareness for your business and spread the gospel. It's a win-win. Learn more by going to thestationofthecross.com and clicking on the business sponsorship button. Contact Zach Krajacek at 1-877-888-6279, extension 106, or Zach K at thestationofthecross.com. Thank you for helping to build a faith community with the Station of the Cross.
Each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, the Station of the Cross brings you Heart to Heart with Mother Miriam, a program to inspire you and offer solutions to many of life's challenges. Mother Miriam is a Catholic nun and convert from Judaism, whose humor and holiness, along with years of theological training, bless all who are in need of encouragement and practical advice. Listen on your local Station of the Cross affiliate or on our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. For more information, visit thestationofthecross.com. That's Heart to Heart with Mother Miriam, weekdays from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross. You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call into the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Shortly after today's show, visit our page for the Catholic Current at thestationofthecross.com. Here you'll find a link to Father McTague's recommended reading list and a link for downloading the program so that you can share it with your family and friends.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host at the Catholic Current, where we plug into the truth of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network, where we proclaim the truth with clarity and charity. Today we're reflecting on the first day of hearings to confirm Judge Brett Kavanaugh as the next Supreme Court Justice. And we have with us George Ahrend, who is on the Board of Directors of the Catholic Bar Association. In this segment, we're going to be asking, what should faithful Catholics be rightly expecting of the Supreme Court? And we want to hear from you. Call us now at 1-877-511-5483, or text us at the same number at 1-877-511-5483. George, we just got a text from Samuel in Buffalo, and Sam writes, Early on in today's hearing, Senator Feinstein stated that she saw both sides of the issue of abortion while growing up in the 1950s. And she goes on to say, please comment on how someone of goodwill, Catholic or not, can confront and act on divisive issues such as abortion. Now, I've addressed that question in the past many times in medical ethics and philosophy and theology. As a lawyer, you're working in the practical sphere. How would you begin to approach someone on such a hotly contested emotional issue as abortion? And if you're not going to be, approaching it as a lawyer, and if you're not going to be dismissed as a Catholic kook who gets a big check from the Vatican, which is what people say of me, that I say what I say because of my monthly check from the Vatican. But how would a Catholic lawyer begin to approach a contentious issue like abortion in the public sphere?
At some level, it feels like we're beyond debate. We're just shouting, and the person who shouts the loudest wins. And so
yes.
I'm persuaded by the title of the last show that I heard just the tail end of, that love will end abortion. And I really
yes.
think as a attitude, charity is required in all those issues. And
sure.
The second thing is with in my experience as a lawyer, you're not going to get very many cases that are fighting over the issue of abortion. But I think this principle for persuasion, if there is room for persuasion, is to look for where the other side is right. Mm-hmm. To look at, and then let the truth do its own work. And so, right. Whoever and different folks who are advocating abortion come from different perspectives, and maybe there's a person who's concerned about the plight of a single mother that is facing an unwanted pregnancy and what to do
right.
with that, and that's a different person than somebody who is a kind of a sexual libertine who just wants a backup to birth control. And
right,
and there's probably many more perspectives on that. And so, I think in order to do that, you have to be willing to engage with and listen to the person that you're speaking with. It's part of not just charity, but respecting their dignity as a person, to take them where they're at and point to where they're right, and then just let the truth do its own work. I'm not sure. It's few and far between the times that I've argued somebody who's got a settled position into a position that they didn't already start with, and it's only by kind of pointing out the incongruence between where they're right and where they're wrong that I've ever seen somebody change their mind. And I think that's probably true on this issue as well.
Well, I've taught philosophy for a long time, and I tell the students, beware of what's I've called the rationalist fallacy. And the fallacy goes like this: if only I explain myself clearly enough, people will understand me, and then they'll agree with me. And I say, that's a trail of tears, because people aren't always rational. I had a friend in law school, and when they were discussing Roe v. Wade, one classmate said, well, of course Roe is a bad law, but it's the best law that we have, and it gets us what we want. Well, of course, that's an utterly irrational argument, but that's what that person was clinging to. And you made use of the word persuasion. Well, the roots of that in Latin are persuasio, by means of sweetness. Because ultimately, yes, we want to win arguments, but above that, we want to win souls, and we want to move hearts. And when we have contentious issues like abortion or euthanasia or marriage or gun rights, we have to speak and act in such a way where people can't dismiss us as kooks or villains or lacking compassion. And I think it'll be interesting in the hearings that are coming up in the coming days. I don't think that anyone is going to dismiss Brett Kavanaugh as being unintelligent or insincere or lacking in compassion.
Hard to imagine. I mean, he
right.
serves at a soup kitchen and coaches his grade school girls basketball team. And I'm sure there's plenty of other examples that were brought up
sure.
at the hearing that I'm not calling to mind right now. So I agree.
Sure. No, he's by all accounts, he is a generous, compassionate man, as Jesuits like to say. A man for others in service to the Lord. And we have, in the time that remains, 1-877-511-5483, we want to hear from you and ask questions of our distinguished guests. Judge, how long are the hearings likely to last, and what are we likely to see tomorrow?
So I think there's 3 scheduled days. Tomorrow will be the second day. It should be consumed entirely with questioning of Judge Kavanaugh. And I think that the format is going to be 5 minutes of questions per senator, and they'll just keep going around until the time is exhausted. Okay. So that's tomorrow, the second day, September 5th. And then on Thursday, the 6th, there is going to be a parade of witnesses selected by both sides, the Democrat side of the aisle and the Republican side of the aisle, and that the questioning of those witnesses should consume that third day. I hear it is possible that it'll go a fourth day, but I believe it's only currently scheduled for 3 days right now, so 2 more days.
What types of questions is Judge Kavanaugh likely to face tomorrow?
So they're going to be looking for him to make commitments to certain outcomes on the Democrat side of the aisle. And on the Republican side of the aisle, they'll probably be asking him why he can't make any kind of commitments. And ever since, this has been true ever since we've been having confirmation hearings. The first one was, I guess, about 100 years ago. It was Senator Mike Lee who rehearsed the history on that. But it's currently called the Ginsburg rule, where judicial candidates are supposed to make no predictions, give no previews, and make no forecasts as to what's going to happen. And so what ends up happening is they end up not being able to say an awful lot about the substance of the issues that might come before them. And so the senators are going to, on the Democrat side, are going to be doing the best they can using his existing writings to get him to hint at the predictions, the previews, and the forecasts, and make commitments, either a commitment that they don't like, which will justify their opposition, or a commitment that will hamstring him if and when he does get a decision down the road.
One of the phrases that has been used in the lead up to the hearings is the phrase settled law, and especially does he see Roe versus Wade as settled law? Assuming that a lot of our listeners don't have your legal background, could you explain a little bit what that means and why the phrase settled law is so important in relation to Roe versus Wade?
So it's precedent. That would be the technical term. There's no difference between settled precedent, really, and unsettled precedent. Settled law comes from the phrase that now Chief Justice Roberts used when he was in his confirmation hearings to describe Roe versus Wade. And I think my best interpretation of what he meant was that it was precedent, meaning it had been decided by the court, and it was due to the respect that all precedent is due, and it is only subject to being overruled if the reasoning is incorrect and the consequences of the decision have been harmful. Now, whether it's harmful, and that's basically the test for overruling all precedent. All precedent is essentially settled the moment it's decided, because the case comes up, it's unsettled until it's decided, then it is settled. And you see on the Democrat side sometimes people advocating, I think Senator Feinstein suggested this in the not-too-distant past, that it should be considered a super precedent.
A super precedent.
Meaning that it is less susceptible to being overruled than any other precedent. And obviously we don't want precedent to be overruled willy-nilly, but on both sides of the aisle there are plenty of senators who would like to see plenty of decisions overruled depending on what the issue is. And so they're really just looking to get his commitment to abide by Roe. And given his conservative kind of bit-by-bit, case-by-case seeming temperament and judicial kind of method or philosophy, you wouldn't expect a full frontal assault on Roe versus Wade from Justice Kavanaugh if he's confirmed the first time an abortion case comes in front of him. He will look for a narrower ground, the narrowest grounds, the most judicially restrained grounds to decide the case in front of him. And if that doesn't require the case to be overruled, I wouldn't expect him to go out of his way to do it.
Well, see, that raises an interesting question. I know one of the listeners just texted in about why precedent is so important. I think it's because we need to have some measure of legal and civil stability. And, if you're going to make plans to live in a civil society, you need to have some sense of order and not wake up every morning and see that, the Constitution has been rewritten. Can you offer some reflection as to assuming that he's nominated, approved, what kind of opinions will he be writing, and what areas will he be especially effective in?
Well, so I don't think his effectiveness will be confined to any one area. I mean, he's a gifted writer and a gifted intellect, and so his effectiveness will be in persuading his fellow justices to vote along with him on whatever cases come up. And it's rare in courts of general appellate jurisdiction like this, as opposed to like the tax court or something, where you've got a subject matter expert in a particular area. No, their intelligence will carry over into all the areas I think they'll face. And, there's a lot of other really gifted folks up there already on both sides, and so that's where the work gets done as they try and persuade each other of the best arguments.
So it sounds like he's someone who's a gifted generalist, who's capable of acting effectively in terms of whatever is put before him. You've been listening to the Catholic Current today, where we've been discussing the first day of hearings of Judge Kavanaugh as Supreme Court Justice nominee. Our guest has been George Ahrend of the Catholic Bar Association. Thank you, George, for participating in the conversation today, bringing your expertise and knowledge. I'm Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host on the Catholic Current. Look for my column on Aletheia tomorrow morning, aletheia.org, Aleteia. Through the intercession of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, may the Lord protect you from all harm and every evil. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, go in peace, and please pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Station of the Cross. The Station of the Cross is a listener-funded nonprofit organization. If this podcast has helped you in your spiritual journey, please consider making a donation. Donations can be made through our website, thestationofthecross.com, or by calling 1-877-888-6279. You can also donate right through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. Thank you for listening to and supporting the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of truth with clarity and charity.